at what happened to Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego when they were thrown into the burning fiery furnace. I want to tell you a profound truth about 4- and 5-year-old boys. If you're ever asked to read their favourite bedtime story, woe betide you if you miss any of it out. Because that kid has probably heard the story 2,139 times already before. And if you miss out so much as a comma, you're going to bring down his wrath on your head. I know one 5-year-old boy whose all-time favourite Bible story was Daniel chapter 3. And when it came to bedtime and Mummy asked him, what story would you like? He would 9 times out of 10 say, can we read about Daniel and Shadrach, Meshach and Abednego? And she'll say to him, laddie, do I have to read all of it? And he will say, of course you have to read all of it. It's not the same story if you don't. So night after night, this mother would dutifully read every single word of Daniel chapter 3 from the King James Version, and she knew it with her eyes shut. And sometimes her eyes did shut. And if she so much as missed out a sentence or a verse or one of the instruments in the orchestra, that little lad knew, and he would tell her to go back and read it properly. And I should know, because that was me. Now, what struck me as a 5-year-old was the main message this morning, that even in the most terrifying and testing times, God rescues us. What I didn't understand at the time was the deeper, much more adult truth that we'll come on to a bit later, that God doesn't guarantee an exit from a crisis. And even if we have to go through it, as Shadrach, Meshach and Abednego did, he is still God and he is still with us. So, let's look at Nebuchadnezzar. I'm sorry, the tech has failed me, so you haven't got any graphics this morning. You'll have to listen instead of watch as well. It was Lord Acton who once shrewdly observed that power corrupts and absolute power corrupts absolutely. And that's where Nebuchadnezzar is at the beginning of chapter 3. He's a pyromaniac monarch. And we're building a picture here in the book of Daniel of a mentally unstable monarch, a very powerful dictator with an unpredictable mind. Got a few of them in the world today, haven't we? In chapter 1, for example, the butler is in fear of his life at the hands of Nebuchadnezzar if he gives Daniel vegetables for dinner. For crying out loud. Yet by the end of the chapter, Nebuchadnezzar is so kindly disposed towards Daniel and his 3 friends that he promotes them to some of the top, posts in the cabinet. Then in chapter 2, Nebuchadnezzar is deprived of sleep. He has this recurring nightmare. And he threatens vengeance on any of his advisors who can't tell him what he's been dreaming about. The catch is, he doesn't tell them what he's been dreaming about. They've got to tell him the dream as well as the interpretation. But by the end of the chapter, Daniel is being promoted to prime minister and having expensive gifts lavished upon him. This is not a stable man we've got here in Nebuchadnezzar. Now in chapter 3, we find Nebuchadnezzar reasserting himself. Here is a megalomaniac setting up this statue to be worshipped. And yet by the end, he's going to be elevating these 3 Israelites even further. Now, of course, don't forget, in the original document, in the original version of Daniel, it's mainly Hebrew, some Aramaic in the book of Daniel. In the original document, there were no chapter divisions. They are there for our convenience. And so as you read it through, or as you hear it read, as was the way with a lot of their scripture at the time, as you hear it read, a very clear impression is going to be created in your mind of a king who acts out his fantasies. And we can see this by asking the question, what was this statue an effigy of? Now there are 2 possibilities. The first is that it's an effigy of one of the Babylonian gods, possibly the god Nebo, which is part of Nebuchadnezzar's name. You can see it in the first syllable. And other similar statues, smaller ones, have been found in the Middle East. The other possibility, and for me this is the more likely one, is that Nebuchadnezzar has here created a statue of himself. It is a stylized image, 90 feet high, 9 feet wide, and he wants people to worship it. Here is a leader who wants to draw attention to himself. We've got a few of those these days, have we not? Now let's not forget that Nebuchadnezzar has just had a dream of a huge statue in which he, personally, is the golden head. And it seems that Nebuchadnezzar is trying to unite the nation under a single religious banner, that of worshipping him, or at least worshipping this statue. And so he demands complete and total obedience. He's going to sack or to wipe out anyone who opposes him. And we've got a few of those in the world today. His demands, however, are slightly more draconian than most of the leaders who sack some of their staff today. His demand is that if you disobey me, you will be punished by being put to death, by burning, by being cremated alive. You say that doesn't happen today. In 2011, the Bulletin for Missionary Research was published, as it is every year, and it caused quite a stir in 2011 by publishing figures for martyrdom. And they define martyrdom like this. It's someone, a believer in Christ, who has lost their life prematurely in a situation of witness as a result of human hostility. Martyrdom. And the report calculated that a conservative estimate within the first decade of this millennium, from 2000 to 2010, there were on average 270 new Christian martyrs every 24 hours. My friends, Nebuchadnezzar is not dead. Now, I'd be surprised if any of us here will be martyred for our faith because we live in cushy Britain, although it is always possible. We're not going to be threatened with losing our lives. This surely is an extreme case. For us it is, but for some people it isn't. But I believe that if we study the extreme case, if we study the ultimate case of how to live for the Lord under threat, it will help us to live for him in the minor pressures that we face every day. Yeah? So let's look at how Nebuchadnezzar operated. And just for fun, I thought I'd read a few verses from the King James Version. These are the ones that I remember by heart from being a 5-year-old. Then an herald cried aloud, verse 4, "To you it is commanded, O people, nations, and languages, that at what time ye hear the sound of the cornet, flute, harp, sackbut, psaltery, dulcimer, and all kinds of music," spelt with a K, "ye fall down and worship the golden image which Nebuchadnezzar the king has set up. And whoso falleth not down and worshippeth shall the same hour be cast into the midst of a burning fiery furnace." Now, actually, there is one small linguistic thing I want you to notice there, and that is the way it refers to the statue that King Nebuchadnezzar has set up. And time and again in the Hebrew, in this chapter, we're told Nebuchadnezzar has set it up. He's set it up. He's set it up. He's set it up. This is a man who wants to draw attention to his statue, which is likely a statue of himself. And if you fail to worship it, there's going to be an immediate sentence of execution. No case for the defense, no appeal to a higher court. You bow or you burn. That's your choice. Verse 8. At this time, some astrologers, you could translate that as Chaldeans, most likely astrologers, some astrologers came forward and denounced the Jews. Now there's the motive. The people exposing Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego had a hidden agenda. They wanted to denounce the God that these three men stood for. That's why they did it. Jews would preach that astrology was wrong. And it seems that these astrologers were going to seize this opportunity to make trouble. So it's a political ploy. And it might yet turn out to be fake news. But Nebuchadnezzar doesn't care. Probably the clearest sign of this king's instability is his reaction even to the news of opposition. He is furious. He didn't even yet know whether these men had defiled his order. This was only reported as hearsay. And yet he was livid. And so, in order to appear even-handed in front of the gathering of high-ranking officials, he makes this order. And they are arrested, and the furnace is heated 7 times hotter than it was wont to be heated. Again, that's the King James Version. 7 times hotter than it was wont to be heated. Now, we just need to dig into that a little bit, because they didn't have any thermometers at the time. And there are some people, I read one book, where the author thinks that there were 7 sets of bellows that they used instead of just one. Actually, what he fails to spot is the way in which the number 7 is used in the ancient world, and particularly in the Old Testament. It's a number of completeness. It's the number sometimes of perfection. In other words, if it's 7 times hotter than it was wont to be heated, it's likely this is as hot as humanly possible. It's completely hot. 7 is the number of completion. And in fact, their archaeological remains exist in the Middle East of furnaces around this area that could achieve temperatures between 900 and 1,000 degrees centigrade. So, we know they could burn things really hot. And this is the very adult message I alluded to earlier on. Look at verse 16. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego replied to the king, King Nebuchadnezzar, we do not need to defend ourselves before you in this matter. If we are thrown into the blazing fiery furnace, the God we serve is able to deliver us, and he will deliver us from your majesty's hand. But even if he does not, we want you to know, your majesty, that we will not serve your gods or worship the image of gold that you have set up. Now, at first hearing, this sounds as if, the 3 Israelites were having some doubts about whether the Lord might save them from the furnace, but even if not. So can you see the difference between the child's message and the adult one? The child's message, the one that we were teaching the young people and children at the family service an hour and a half ago, is this. Wow. God got Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego out of the fiery furnace. Isn't God amazing? Yes, he is, of course. And to be fair, Jez did allude to the adult message as well. However, the adult message is much deeper. And it goes like this. God might not get me out of this. We're not expecting a guarantee from him. But even if he doesn't, he is still God. He is still sovereign. And we will live for him, come what may. Martyrdom or no. So, Nebuchadnezzar, mighty king, you need to know, says Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, you need to know that there is a King of kings. There is a God much more powerful than you. And even if we burn to a frazzle, we are his emissaries on this earth. Those 3 brave men were stating eternal truth and stating it with their lives. Would you do that? Would I do it? The answer to that question is, I honestly don't know. Because I'm not there. Oh yes, I'd love to say, oh yes, of course, I'm going to be a big macho man. I'm going to stand for Christ. But when it comes to it, it's not that straightforward. See, there was no exit route for the nearly 1 million martyrs between 2000 and 2010. But God is still God. He is still sovereign. So let's just press the pause button there, shall we? At this moment, Shadrach, Meshach and Abednego thought they were going to be martyrs. The fire was so hot that the men who threw them in were incinerated as they came away from the furnace. Now, we may have some difficulty in understanding exactly what went on in that fire. All I have is the text in front of me. Although I have no problem with believing that God could do such a thing. But remember that scientific curiosity was not the reason this book was written. It was written to tell me about God and his works. The purpose of this passage is to tell us how God works in fiery situations. It tells us that he sees when his people are in trouble, that no suffering is unobserved by him, and that he has true power to rescue. But sometimes he allows people to go through the fire because Shadrach, Meshach and Abednego were not instantly rescued. I think I would pray, as they certainly did, Lord, get me out of here. I hope I would have the grace to pray, Lord, get me through here. I want to tell you about a good friend of mine. I'm going to call him Graham, although that's not his real name. Graham was very active, full stop. He was always on the go. He was a banker who'd retired in his mid-50s, and he loved the open-air life, so he thought, what can I do that's in the open air? I know, I'll mow people's gardens. And he set up this little business of doing gardening and mowing people's lawns, and he loved it. He never stopped, always on the move. But at the age of 59, he had persistent headaches and was diagnosed with a brain tumour that was inoperable. Now, as a church, we prayed earnestly for Graham. But no apparent healing took place. In spite of his treatment, there was no apparent diminution of his cancer, at least nothing that would save his life. But in that time, while we were praying, a change came about in Graham. Instead of striving for his cure, he began to rest in God. And I shall never forget his 60th birthday party. It's not at this church, it's one of my previous ones. I shall never forget his 60th birthday party. It took place in the church. He was in a wheelchair for the 90% of the time. His mobility by this time had been compromised. And people from all over the country came to celebrate this life with him because he knew, barring a miracle, this was going to be his last birthday. And the joy on that man's face was unmistakable. I got photographs of it at home. Knowing that God was alongside him in that situation became much more important to Graham than being healed or being rescued from his predicament. My friends, our almighty, sovereign God accompanies us through the fire of tough experience. And as I look around this room, knowing some of the lives that we've led here, I'm sure I know there are many of us who could say, yes, he's done that. And that's what he did for Shadrach, Meshach and Abednego. He didn't answer their prayers for rescue. He was with them in the fire. You see, 3 men went in and 3 men came out. But there were 4 men in the fire. And And when God is with us in the fire, even there, we can experience freedom. Did you notice how the Bible tells us that there were 4 men unbound? 4 men who were free. Nebuchadnezzar, sure, he issued what he thought was a rhetorical challenge to the heavens. What God can deliver you from my hands? I am the most powerful man on earth. But to his horror, he discovered there was a God in heaven who could do exactly that. A God for whom Nebuchadnezzar's threats meant absolutely nothing. Had my tech been working, I'd be showing you a piece of cobbled pavement right now. It's just a bit of cobblestone. There's tarmac all the way around it. It's a circle. It's about that, just over a metre and a bit in diameter. And it's in Oxford. And it's opposite Balliol College. And most people don't notice it's there. It's Balliol College one side, a rather nice cafe the other. It's the place where the Oxford martyrs were tied to a stake and burned to death. And Bishop Ridley and Bishop Latimer were burned on the 16th of October 1555. And then Archbishop Cranmer was burned on the 21st of March the next year, 1556. Now their burning was not accompanied by God's deliverance. No angel came to rescue them. But this is what Latimer said to Ridley as they lit the fire. Be of good cheer, Master Ridley, and play the man, for we shall this day light such a candle in England that I trust by God's grace will never be put out. And that candle is still burning today. That's the candle of the gospel. The gospel of salvation, the gospel of rescue, the gospel of freedom in Christ that they gave their lives for. Let's bow our heads in a moment's prayer, shall we?